Short-lived, but not forgotten. One season, but it's still poppin'. Short-lived, a quick goodbye, but they'll live on while we ask why.
Hello out there in YouTube land. Welcome back to the television graveyard with another episode of Short-Lived. This is episode number 5. Last week we looked at the Tammy Grimes show that was famously canceled after about 4 episodes. And we talked about the problems that they had with that. I want to go back about 11 years to a similar sort of idea that was done on CBS in 1955. The show called It's Always Jan, which was a sitcom based around Janice Page, who was also a Broadway star. Janice Page had become famous in The Pajama Game on Broadway the year before, in 1954, and this was an attempt to build a sitcom around her. It was an interesting concept. She plays Janice Stewart, who's a war widow and nightclub singer, who lives with her daughter and 2 other female roommates. And it's about their, struggles trying to make it in show business and having the young child, and played, for laughs. But the thing you'll notice on this show is that they didn't do on the Tammy Grimes show is they allow Janice Page to sing, which is what she's, best known for. Have a lot of fantasy sequences and at least one song per episode. Now, this only ran for 1 season, and we'll get into why that is, but let's take a look at it and see what you think.
Of the Waldorf. Here in my salon, I create hairstyles for some of America's smartest women, and I have found a remarkable shampoo that actually helps your permanent hold its curl. It is today's dream shampoo with a hairspring formula. Let me show you with this permanent. Look at this side before shampooing. It is limp, lifeless. But when we wash with today's dream, see how springy and elastic the curls become, how lively. Help your permanent hold its curl. Get today's dream shampoo with its hairspring formula.
Feel like a feather in the breeze, riding on high, high in the sky. Honey, and I'm walking on air. Since the moment that you told me that you cared. Oh, I feel like a feather in the breeze, floating through space in your embrace, dancing on clouds way up above. Since the second that you beckoned to my love, I'm happy, so happy. My troubles just disappear. As soon as you're by my side, I'm satisfied, and I feel like a feather in the breeze, having my fun, kissing the sun, and it's because you are the one. So I'm singing like the birdies in the trees, and I feel like a feather
wonderful, Jan.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Pembroke.
Won't you join us for a drink?
Oh, no, thank you. I want to see my agent for a minute. Thanks anyway. So?
So remember the part that goes ba-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-dum?
Yeah?
So that's not how it goes.
So how does it go?
So like this. Diddly-dum, 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 diddly-dum.
I'll go in my dressing room and commit Harry Carey.
Oh, wait.
Why?
I'm not finished.
So what else?
Well, you looked wonderful, you sounded great, and I can sit here and listen to you all night.
Harry, have I told you that I love you?
You'll have to get over it. I'm already spoken for.
Oh, Bud, you...
Anyway, everybody knows nobody loves an agent, eh? Well, I gotta go now. I gotta run. Uh-oh, speaking of agents, here comes the biggest vulture of them all. Baby! Sweetheart! You look wonderful.
You're looking great yourself.
It's good to see you.
It's good to see you, too.
Sweetheart.
Baby.
Jan, this is Jack Adams.
The Jack Adams? Of the Jack Adams Agency?
How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Jack, this is Jan Stewart, a client of mine. A very good client. She's loyal. This girl is loyal. I tell you, Jack, if another agent came along and tried to steal her from me, he'd just be wasting his time. Because his girl is loyal. L-O-Y-L-E, loyal. Just to show you how loyal she is, I'm going to walk away now and leave you here. That's how loyal she is. She's so loyal, sometimes I call her Loyal John.
Harry, do you think I'd try to steal a client from you? You, my oldest friend?
Baby.
Sweetheart.
Bye, Loyal Jan.
He's a wonderful guy. He's a regular doll. Why don't you leave him?
What?
Come with my office. I caught your act last Friday. I got news for you. You're great. Sensational. Better than that, you're good. My office could do big things for you.
But...
I know. Harry. He's a wonderful guy. A doll. I love him like a brother. Get rid of him. But, baby, he's small time. So he can only do small time things for you. But me, I'm the biggest. Jack Adams Agency. Offices in Hollywood, Chicago, Paris, London. With me behind you, there's no limit to how far you can go. With Harry, how long you been in this rat trap?
2.5 years.
With Harry, you'll be here when you're 70. They'll have to wheel you on stage.
What an entrance. Jan Stewart, the Grandma Moses of the nightclubs.
Have we got a deal?
I couldn't. Harry's more than my agent. He's my friend.
Look, baby, you're in a tough racket. There's no room for sentiment. The client-agent relationship is purely a matter of business.
Sorry. I'm Loyal Jan.
Sure you are. Only, why don't you think it over and give me a call tomorrow? Hmm? Look, Harry, you'll be here when you're 70. They'll have to wheel you on stage.
Since the moment that you told me that you one feather in the breeze, floating through space, in your embrace, dancing on clouds way up above. Since the second that you beckoned to my love, I'm happy, so happy when you're near. My troubles just disappear. As soon as you're by my side, I'm satisfied and feel like I'm so fast, Morty. Kissing the sun, having my fun, and it's because you are the one. So I'm singing like the birdies in the trees. And I feel like a feather. Yes, sir. I feel like a feather. I feel like a feather in the breeze. Oh, Harry, it's been 42 years now. When are you going to get me something else? When are you going to get me a big club?
I've been trying, Bunny. They've been pitching you for the Copa.
The Copa, what'd they say?
You need a little more experience.
Jack, you mean that old bag has been singing here over 40 years now?
It's a sad story. She was great. Great. She could have gone someplace. Hit the top, the way you did when you left your little agent to go with me.
Well, why didn't she?
'Cause she's loyal.
Loyal?
Yeah. Loyal.
What a silly thing to be. Loyal.
Who'd she think she was? Nathan Hale? For little Harry Cooper, she laid down her whole life like he was America at war. Loyal she had to be. Loyal. Loyal. Loyal.
All right, so I'll be the Grandma Moses of the nightclubs. So they'll have to wheel me on stage. At least when I get there, I'll be able to look people in the eye, right?
Coffee's getting cold.
So you gotta step on a few people to get someplace in this business, huh? Well, maybe Mr. Jack Adams thinks so, but not me. No siree, not me. Because I'm gonna tell you something, Pat. No matter how big you get in this business, if you haven't got friends, what have you got? I ask you, what have you got?
Iced coffee.
Pat, I just can't walk out on Harry after all these years. Not after his friendship, his faith in me, his love. Can I?
Of course you can't.
Why can't I? The agent-client relationship is strictly business. If Harry can't do for me what another agent can, why should I blindly stick with him? Is that logical?
No, it's not.
So I leave Harry, right?
Right.
Harry is sweet, but business is business.
Right.
Only a fool would stick.
Right.
So I leave.
Phew. I'm glad that's settled. And you finally made up your mind, huh?
Yep. I'll never leave Harry. I love him. He's a doll. He's a rare, sweet, lovable human being. That's why I'll never leave him. He's so sweet and lovable, I'm starting to hate him. If Harry wasn't so sweet, I could leave him. Why couldn't he be a little mean? Why does he have to be so nice? What kind of an attitude is that for an agent anyway? I don't think that's being so nice.
Neither do I. I mean, if he were really nice, he'd have a little meanness in him so his friends could hate him if necessary.
I sound pretty silly, don't I?
You sure do.
Stanley? Is loyalty such a terrible thing, is it? Because that's what I am. Loyal Jan.
I only brought the rolls.
Stanley, you're in business. Tell me, is it wrong or is it right for me to mix sentiment with my relationship with my agent? What I mean to say is this. If somebody else can do more for me than Harry, why shouldn't I leave him?
Jan, all I can say is that if the man who sold us our dill pickles was my uncle, and those pickles were lousy, ouch!
Why are your pickles so lousy?
Because the man who sells them is my uncle. But we're a very sentimental family. Who says it's right?
Oh, Stanley, you're no help. No, wait. It is right, it is. Business is business. But to some people, sentiment and loyalty are more important. And that's why your father buys lousy dill pickles from your uncle and why I have to stick with Harry. Stanley, you're a big help.
Thanks.
You have completely opened my eyes to the only honorable, decent decision that I can make.
I have?
Yeah, why don't you keep your big mouth shut?
Well, that's what you wanted to hear.
Oh,
I'm sorry. Oh, look, I know I'm behaving kind of childish, but... No. Doggone it, I made a decision, and I'm going to stick to it.
Good! Which way did she decide?
I'm going to stick with Harry. Hello? Oh, Mr. Adams, I was just about to call and tell... What? What? Oh, really? Really? Oh, yes. Oh. What is it? Jack Adams. He can get me into the sky room of the Sherry Waldorf.
Oh, how wonderful. Do you know what that room means?
6 years with Harry, and I'm still in Tony's cellar. And overnight with Jack Adams, I'm in the sky. Pat, what'll I do? Will you tell me what's right, George?
George, look what you're doing to that handkerchief.
Gee, honey, I'm sorry it's such a mess.
Well, never mind. I've discovered something that even gets dirt like that out. It's Dash.
Yes, Dash. Procter & Gamble's great new detergent for automatic washers. Just watch this dramatic cleaning test. In these 2 jars, we'll put a teaspoon of a leading low sudser in one, Dash in the other. On this cloth, cut in half a heavy mixture of dirt and oil. Half there, half here. With Dash, no more worry about over-sudsing that can slow down your washer the way high sudsers can. Look how Dash's low suds are cleaning. See how much darker this water is getting. Dash is really taking out that dirt. Time's up. Now the proof. The cloth washed in this leading low sudser, dirty. The piece washed in Dash, clean.
And Dash's low suds always rinse out completely.
Honey, this Dash really cleans.
Yes, no low sudser or high sudser gets clothes cleaner. In fact, Dash gets clothes cleaner than any other product, especially made for automatics.
All right, so I stick with Harry. So I'm the Grandma Moses of the nightclub. So I can look people in the eye. So what? I won't even be able to see them. Not without my bifocals.
Jen, I gotta go to work. There's no one in the store.
Mom, I'll be late for school.
Sit down. I have one of the most important decisions in my life to make, and you desert me like rats deserting a sinking ship. I need your help. I need advice.
You don't listen when I give it to you.
All right, I'll listen. Look, the way I look at it is this. The Sky Room is New York's biggest nightclub. I can't afford to lose a break like this. I gotta forget Harry.
Okay, forget Harry.
Sure, forget Harry.
Sure, forget Harry.
Sit down. You know I can't forget Harry. You know it. Harry's a sweet, wonderful, lovable little guy, and I can't leave him. Wouldn't be loyal.
All right, don't leave Harry.
Sure, don't leave Harry.
Okay, don't leave Harry.
Sit down. How can you all sit there being so loyal to Harry? Where's your loyalty to me? That's what I'd like to know. Sit down. I think of myself, don't I? I gotta think of Josie. Think of all the wonderful things I could buy, all the money I could make. You know how much they pay in the Sky Room? Sky Room. New York's swankiest nightclub. See, girl isn't a singer there. She's a chanteuse. Can't you just see me there? Feel like a feather in the breeze, riding on high in the sky, honey, and I'm walking on air. Since the moment that you told me that you cared, oh, I feel like a feather in the breeze, flying through space in your embrace, dancing on clouds way up above. Since the second that you beckoned to my love, I'm
I'm happy, so happy when you're near. My troubles just disappear. As soon as you're by my side, I'm satisfied and I feel like a feather in the breeze, having my fun, kissing the sun, and it's because you are the one. So I'm singing like the birdies in the trees, and I feel like a feather, feel like a feather. I feel like a feather in the breeze.
Miss Stewart, I'm from the New York Herald Times.
How sweet.
Miss Stewart, you are the biggest overnight success that Broadway has ever known.
Yes, I am.
So tell me, for all our millions of readers, what do you feel is the biggest factor in your phenomenal success?
I owe it all to my agent, Harry Cooper.
How loyal of you. In what way was he responsible for your success?
I fired him.
Then your advice to the thousands of aspiring young performers trying to succeed is?
Disloyalty.
Thank you. You have heart.
That settles it. Josie!
Yes, Mom.
Don't you think I'm right, baby? Don't you think that I have to go with Jack Adams?
Sure, Mom, sure. Only now can I go to school?
Do you really think so, baby? Do you really think so?
Sure. Can I go now?
All right, you talked me into it. Oh, Josie, it's going to be so wonderful. I'll be a star, and we'll have lots of money, and...
Mom, I'm late for school. And I don't want to be here when you have to tell Uncle Harry.
Oh, Josie, it's going to be so wonderful. Josie, you're late for school. You better hurry.
Yeah.
Come on, and thank you for helping me out, honey. Oh, it's going to be so wonderful. You just wait and see. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Feel like a feather in the breeze. Harry, I'm going to have to tell him, but how? How? Oh, what's the matter with me? He's not a baby. He can take it. I'll just tell him. Right off. Harry, I'll say, I'm leaving you to go with Jack Adams. Harry, I'm leaving you to go with Jack Adams. Oh, I didn't mean it. I'll never leave you. Never. That's ridiculous. What is he, a baby? He'd never do anything like that. As a matter of fact, he'd probably tell me I was doing the right thing. Sure. Because that's the kind of a guy he is. Harry, I'm leaving you to go with Jack Adams.
Jan, that's a wonderful idea. Wonderful.
What about you? Won't you worry about losing me as a client?
Well, sure, but I'm more than your agent. I'm also your friend. And as your friend, I'm happy. No, but he's got offices in Hollywood, London, and Paris. You'll be famous, you'll be a star, you'll be rich. So what if I starve to death? This is the happiest moment of my life. Happy.
Sure. That's the way he'll feel about it. Because that's the kind of a guy he is. He'll be glad for me. Feel like feather in the breeze, riding on high in the sky.
Hello, may I speak with Mr. Adams, please? Jan Stewart, yes, I'll wait.
Boy, that Harry, what a guy.
What a sweet, understanding, unselfish guy. A real friend. A friend you can count on. Not like some people I can think of, always thinking about themselves. Selfish, inconsiderate, doing only what's good for them. Never thinking of anybody else.
Mr. Adams, I would like to tell you that I won't leave Harry if I have to stay in Tony's cellar till I'm 170. Goodbye. What did I say? I probably would have gotten nosebleeds in the sky room anyway.
Jan, you're so loyal, it turns my stomach.
Jan, Bunny, sweetheart, I ran all the way, you'll never guess. Never in a million years.
Harry, what is it?
So you won't believe it.
So what?
So why should I tell you if you won't believe it?
So I'll believe it, so I'll believe it.
So how could you believe it if I don't believe it myself?
Oh, Harry.
Listen. So listen. I hear about this job, see? Girl singer. So I figure, why should I go? Why should a fancy club buy a client for me? So I'm not going to go, see? Then I get to thinking how Jan's counting on me, huh? She's not only a client, she's a friend. So I say to myself, so what's the worst they can do? So they'll throw me out. So I go. So you know what? So this coming Monday, you open in the Sky Room at the Sherry Waldorf.
What? Harry, but how?
How? I'll tell you how, Jan. I got to thinking how loyal you were, how you stuck with me, even though I'm a small timer. I got to feeling so proud. I went in there like I was 10 feet tall. I did a selling job like you never heard. You know what, Jan? I beat out Jack Adams.
You did?
Yeah, he was there trying to sell a guy one of his clients. Can you picture her face when she finds out she lost the job to a girl with a small-time agent like me?
I sure can. Harry?
Yeah?
Harry?
So what?
Harry? So let's dance. Huh? I'm happy, happy, happy.
In several western towns, children rarely got tooth decay. Why? Their drinking water contained fluoride. Now, after years of fluoride research, Procter & Gamble proudly announces triumph over tooth decay for everyone everywhere as it brings you Crest toothpaste with Fluorestan, its exclusive fluoride compound that's far superior to fluoride alone. Here's how Crest works. Crest with Fluorestan actually combines with and strengthens tooth enamel to lock out decay from within. Yes, with Crest, you and your family will have far fewer cavities. Your teeth will be strengthened against decay, and regular Crest use will keep them that way. Crest helps keep your teeth beautiful, blocks out bad breath as no other toothpaste can. Start now to triumph over tooth decay. Get Crest with Fluorestan, world's greatest weapon against decay.
Well, that's the story, Harry. I had to tell you or I would have felt like a real phony.
Jan, Bunny.
Harry, I'm so ashamed of myself.
Jan.
How can I even think about leaving you? You, my friend, my loyal friend. You, who have always been more than an agent to me. Well, you never lost confidence in me. You always had faith in me. Harry, can you ever forgive me?
Forgive you? Jan, Bunny, I've been fighting the same battle myself.
Huh?
I got an offer to go with a real big agency, even bigger than Jack Adams.
Harry!
Yeah, all week long I've been wrestling with myself. Should I dump you for a nice, safe salary, or do I stay loyal and keep on plugging away? Jan, I almost accepted, but I didn't know how to break the news to you.
And I didn't know how to break the news to you.
What the daydreams I had. Every time I tried to tell you, you fainted.
So did you.
But I couldn't leave you.
And I couldn't leave you.
So we'll stick. And with your faith in me and my faith in you, how can we miss?
Yeah, how can we miss?
Jan, you really think we'll get any place?
Harry, I was just going to ask you the same question. Good night, folks.
Presented by Crest Toothpaste with Floristan, exclusive fluoride compound that brings you triumph over tooth decay. And the great new detergent for automatic washers, Dash, with low suds that really clean. Don't forget, every Monday night, the Lucille Ball, Desi Arnaz show, I Love Lucy.
So that was It's Always Jan that ran on CBS for one season in 1955. There's 26 episodes of this show, but this is the only episode that is actually available to view. It was done by Desilu Studios, of course, where they did I Love Lucy, and it was, intended for syndication, so they, had film copies made of all of it. It was rerun even after its initial season. CBS rerun it the next year, and then NBC picked it up for daytime showing in '56. So it, was aired quite a bit, but it never went into syndication. And it's never really been shown. Apparently, Janice Page and her husband had all the 16 millimeter prints of all the episodes, but they just were never released. Janice Page herself only died last year at the age of 101, if you can believe it. So maybe we'll start seeing them, but this one called Guilty Conscience, the one we just watched, is the one that's out there and available. You'll notice a couple of things. Like I said, there's the musical numbers that she does, which is really the highlight of the show, and sort of the fantasy sequences. She also breaks the fourth wall a good bit, sort of talking to the camera, even though at times she's supposed to be talking to herself. And she does break the fourth wall at the very end to thank the audience. You'll notice Stanley Schreiber, the young man who comes in who's delivering the roles. His character is as a delivery boy from the local delicatessen. That's Artie Johnson, who many of you will remember from Laughing, who became very popular on that show. This is one of his earliest roles. The critical reception of this really was interesting because initially the critics were kind of behind it. They thought it was an elevated sort of sitcom. They called them comedy dramas, which we later know from like the late 80s, early 90s, there was a trend towards dramedies. And we don't really know, but they seem to think there was a lot more heart in it, a lot more character development than there was in an average sitcom. We only have the one episode that we just watched to go by, but it'd be interesting if there was some of that. But by the time the mid-season had rolled around, they were sort of turning against the series. They were saying there was not enough novelty to it to lift it out of situation comedy tropes. And what we did see from the episode we watched was it is kind of a typical sitcom setup. And one of the critics was saying there were more laughs on the soundtrack than there were actually from the episode. And they do kind of lean heavily into that laugh track. Other people talked about that it was sort of just a watered down I Love Lucy. And it was even to the point that she had the same hairstyle as Lucy. I didn't really notice that, but once they said it, looking at it, it was like, yeah, she does, kind of resemble her. But it was done at the same studio, same hair and makeup people, so maybe it was just a coincidence. But it ran on CBS from 55 to 56. And again, it had a couple of times of reruns, but it just hasn't been seen really since. It didn't end up on, any kind of home media release, and it didn't end up on, retro stations like MeTV or TV Land or anything. So it's kind of just forgotten. But I think it does, what it does well. And again, it's better than the Tammy Grimes show. And I think it's because they allow her to sing and do what, she's known as a performer for. Now, Dennis Page, of course, did do film and television. So she was, well versed in Broadway and on the screen. Many people will remember her from later TV shows. She had a recurring role as a waitress on All in the Family, and I remember that because there was an episode where her flirtation with Archie kind of becomes serious, and Archie sort of thinks about cheating on Edith with her. And I remember that as a kid being, that was really sort of beyond the pale for what I was used to in a sitcom. Also, some of you will remember her in the early days of Happy Days sitcom as a waitress again at a roadside diner, where they sort of intimate that she might be Fonzie's mom. It was not really carried over in the series, but there's a few episodes with her in it where her and Henry Winkler do sort of have a heart to heart, and it's never really denied, but never really stated outright either that she's, the Fonz's mom. But that was, it's Jan. It's always Jan. Nice little sitcom. Had a 1 year run. Would have liked to see more of it. I would like for somebody to be able to find other episodes so we could see really what it was like and see if it should have deserved more time. But as always, here on Short Lived, we take what we get. So have a good evening. And this is Scott Free signing off, and I will talk to you later.